Good morning. My name is Andrew Smith, and my old poetry name was Sunfrog. And I'm going to read a brand new poem dedicated to my parents, Barb Smith and the late Ken Smith. It's called Comfort Curse. All this comfort is a curse. Do you remember that day you were supposed to go to the zoo, but somebody snatched your mother's purse? This comfort is a curse. Success was a drug that bought us an indoor swimming pool, but one day my parents decided they would not be mere moneyed upper middle class fools. I was almost 23. They were almost 50. Dad took a sabbatical in 1989 and Mom joined him in Intentional Christian Community in Chicago. They walked away from that creature comfort class. They were taking on a counterculture lifestyle, walking away from country club status, meeting Jesus among the poor, but also among those committed to justice, peace, revelation, consensus, conversation, radical disciple transformation. They were inspired in part by my time at the Open Door community in Atlanta, Georgia, just 2 years before, just walking the streets, not only serving the poor, but choosing to be poor. Inspired also by when Daddy went to Mexico with other church leaders to Cuernavaca and learned about the base communities there from the Cuernavaca Center for Intercultural Dialogue on Development, where poverty and liberation theology were in the ground and the air. Somehow the company of Dad's downtown success decided it was best to buy him out just like that. Retired so young. But Mom and Dad, they are way better at math and saving than me, their ADHD poet son, would ever be. So just like that, they were free. Suddenly, a shock to our systems, the changing landscape of our lives, they came home. They wanted me to meet a lesbian preacher. Her name was Jane. She would be my teacher. Free from the tyranny of career and success, no longer participating in this particular principality, but continually confessing exactly what it was. They were having savings and were able to travel to play cards, swim in coral reefs, take a dinghy to an island off the island of Ireland. An island of Ireland, the same island years later where Luke Skywalker would live in the never-ending Star Wars world. So sorry that Dad never lived to see those later films. He would have loved bragging that he was there before Luke. He would remind me that he took Arthur and me to A New Hope when it first came out, back when that episode 4 was episode 1. And now that was fun, so incredibly young. We don't know what we know now about the curse of comfort, but they were learning all along. From Chicago riots to Cleveland Witness, they were anti-racist churchgoers all the way back. Raised us in integrated schools with fewer white than black. Church was in a house, and they called it the Congregation of Reconciliation, 1972 in Parma, Ohio. Some Presbyterians trying to respond to the sea change of civil rights. Racial reconciliation still only an aspiration at this hour in this situation so strange, like the boots of hate stomping on every flower of joy and revolution, and the family of hope choosing instead cable news, YouTube lies, a different, more devious dope. They just walked away in the early 1990s. How was that like more than years ago? They were more than 30 years ago. That was like more than 30 years ago. How was the 1990s 30 years ago? They were like, we will just go with the flow, trusted their God to know. So in the throes of church reform, they were reborn with religious feminists and queers, lobbied for universal health care, single payer like Bernie Sanders, yes, but they were international in concern. Traveled to Palestine, each radical step to disinvest themselves from so many illusions of success. The credentialed actuarial career proper only lasted, Dad, 20 years after years of training, but the retirement revolution was 24 years of grace, learning and leaning into his calling in Detroit. That was always our place, where we were taught to love God's black and brown face. Not his Parkinson's, not my alcoholism. Nothing could stop us from following that Jesus. That Jesus you studied at Chicago Theological Seminary, that Jesus you learned about when you shared the room with Karl Barth, Martin Marty, Howard Moody, not to mention the Wild Steve and Lois Rose. That Jesus you kneeled with in Selma, that Jesus you marched with for Cesar Chavez, that Jesus of the rainbow scarf we wore at the General Assembly, that Jesus of Palestine and peace marches, that Jesus of church camps where even evangelical Jesus was radical to us, that Jesus every Sunday, like they say down here, whenever the doors of the church were open, that Jesus found in Sojourners, Dorothy Day, The Other Side, that Jesus you unwittingly taught me through music and television and art, just by exposing me, encouraging me, going to U2 concerts with me. You taught me with those albums, Bob Dylan, Odetta, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, and of course, the speeches of Martin Luther King Jr. Of course, the speeches of Martin Luther King Jr. I would just sit on the floor and listen to him preach, and I would cry. I would cry, but also memorize. I would play the speeches over and over again and felt utterly robbed that he, Martin, and I were only together on this earth for 6 months. And now I can only imagine how his widow and children were feeling then and now, and his only granddaughter so many years later. Over these long years since, his cadence would become my own. Thanks to so many friends and their hospitality, the Black Church became my church too in this wild Presbycostal spirit ride. Jeremiah Wright, James Cone, James Lawson, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Otis Moss Jr., Otis Moss the third. I could go on and on and on. Do I need to go on and on and on? That comfort was a curse. Nobody cares that someone stole my mother's purse, or even today that I was beaten near death just for being outside a car on those urban streets that I still love, that I cannot fathom as the gentrified reality that suddenly descended where we used to get drunk, explore the ruins, and listen to punk. I'm talking about Detroit, where last summer the media missed the crazy police state repression of Black Lives Matter, and with Detroit's police chief, William Barr, and Donald Trump surveying the streets of my city from a helicopter and discussing what God only knows, but I imagine it was not Black liberation. This is why we fight, march, sing, dance, protest, preach, teach, reach, please. To remind people the difference between the Selma kneeling, which is the same as the Kaepernick kneeling, which is the same as the ETSU basketball players kneeling, and remind them we will never forget the Chauvin kneeling, and that some of you sick white siblings, to paraphrase Martin, actually chose cops over George Floyd, Pilate over Christ. You sold your own soul, you bet on your Lord's clothes, and you still roll the dice with even the salvation of this disgusting, depraved excuse for a nation hanging in the hearse. Will we end up in hell or keep fighting for resurrection? Yes, that comfort was a curse. But this struggle, I tell you, and it's hard to say it, this struggle is a blessing. That is how Jesus is still messing with us. He preached and he prayed and even praised while crucified, because no nails, no nasty emails from people who learned about me yesterday on Fox News, no travails can compare with the reckless dare of taking up your cross with you. Taking up your cross with your mom and your dad and with Jesus, my only Lord. I can tell you today, friends, that comfort is a curse. Don't wait for the hearse. Get out and do this thing now. And nobody cares about the day that they stole my mom's purse. Comfort is a curse, a new poem by Andrew Smith, Sunfrog, debuted on this morning, Sunday morning, April 25th, 2021. Thank you for listening.